Happened in the 90s.
I don't know. What do you want to do?
I don't know. What do you want to do?
I could sure go for some comedy. You want to go to a movie?
No, we can always go to a movie.
I want to laugh. I'm in a mood to laugh. Look out! You're gonna hit that guy! You hit him! Wait a minute. Look. Yeah. Look at this. Laughs Unlimited. All comedy showroom. 108 K Street, Old Sacramento. Let's go. It's right around the corner.
Yeah.
Take off, babe.
Go.
Okay, we're here. Stop. We're here. Let's go. Let's go in and see the show. We can buy our tickets so we can get a few laughs.
That's Laughs Unlimited, Sacramento's only all-comedy nightclub.
Scott, hold it. That's Laughs Unlimited, Sacramento's only all-comedy nightclub. For information, call 446-5905. Scott, waste of life. Okay, beat it.
Appearing at Laughs Unlimited through Thursday, it's Pat Paulson.
Hey, boys and girls, this is Steve G and Matt G with Happened in the 90s, a show where we talk about things that happened in the 90s. So get out your Vince Champ cassettes, and you might want to throw them out because we got a guy who's very cool, way cooler than that, and he knows people who are just as funny and funnier. He's our first guest ever on Happened in the 90s, and he goes by the name of Scott Edwards.
Welcome back, Scott.
Oh, so happy to be here. This is exciting. Good to see you guys again.
Good to see you, man. Last time we talked, Tom Brady was on his way to winning like his 17th Super Bowl or something like that. And you're still handsome.
Yeah,
yeah.
You know,
man,
I'd say I'd really get excited about that, but I'm married.
And see, that's the course that I need to know, man. You've got the key. Tell us, impart us with your wisdom, Scott. Like you owned a comedy club in the decade we were born, and you have more hair than both of us combined.
Yeah, I'm jealous. I'm very jealous.
Well, I think it was, I wasn't injecting acid in my head, but wait a minute, the audience wouldn't get that reference.
No.
Okay, no, I think it just comes from good living and good plugs. No, I'm just kidding.
It's a good doctor.
Yeah. But no, comedy in the 90s was already starting to transition. To catch your audience up, my background is I opened the 12th comedy club in the country in 1980 called Laughs Unlimited. I grew it to a chain of 3 clubs with over 100 employees. We got a chance to work with, you name it, Robin Williams, Gary Shandling, Jerry Seinfeld, Jay Leno, Dana Carvey, I can go on and on name dropping, but it was a real blessing to be a part of that huge wave of comedy. Stand-up comedy was like the rock and roll of the era and was just taking off. And in the 90s, it was still going strong in the early 90s, but about the mid 90s, it did start to shift a little bit. And then I sold and got out in 2001 because I felt one, I'd already done it for 20 years, and 2, the audience was shifting. I mean, it's totally different now. What's so strange is to compare what I thought was a challenge in the 90s in dealing with the audience and what we're dealing with now, where you got cell phones that are more important than life itself to people, or the woke environment, or the cancel party, that, you could say the sky is blue and somebody will get all offended that, for me, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I mean, that's I can't imagine how frustrating that could be in somebody that's either already established and is having to deal with this when they've never had to deal with it, or coming, like, it sort of maybe prevents some people from even trying to do it now,
Yeah, and I've talked to comics. In fact, this every Monday, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Clubhouse. I have a room on Clubhouse every Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern, West Coast time. But we talk about adding humor to podcast and the importance of having humor in your life. And I have some professional comedians and comedy writers, and even a high-ranking speaker that joined me as co-host. And it is one of the main discussions is the difference in connecting, because the whole thing about comedy is connecting to your audience, being able to relate to them. You know, the reason people like Seinfeld and Leno are still viable today is that whether they were doing material in the 80s or now, they're relating to the audience. That's what makes comedy work. And it's a big, big challenge right now.
Do you think that the boom that you saw like in the late 80s and 90s is what, do you think the one that's happening now is eclipse that? Because it feels like comedy now, at least where I'm in LA and I use the Comedy Store as a reference point. There was a time where it was, not sold out shows and not everybody even knew about that place. But now it's like everybody has a podcast and, comedy's very much a more popular thing, like for nerds like me and Steve that like stand-up comedy, and for people that are just into laughing. It feels like comedy's gotten huge again. And do you think it's bigger than it was in the 80s?
No, and I don't want to offend anybody. I don't think it's big as all. Hold on, let me fix this. I'm getting a little feedback. Can you still hear me fine?
Yeah, no problem.
What was going on at the time was, I'm not kidding, stand-up comedy was like the rock and roll of the era. Every Tom, Dick, and Harry thought they were going to get a sitcom. It was all over TV. There was clubs. All the discos of the 70s became comedy clubs in the 80s and 90s, right? So, when I opened, I was the 12th club in the entire country. And I would say by 5 years later, it was like Starbucks. There was a club in every corner.
Oh,
so
wow.
That was a really huge transition. What I think you're experiencing, Matt, is that after COVID, when people have been locked down for a year and a half, we're all nutted up and we need to get out. And if there's one place you'd want to go to forget the COVID, to forget the economy, to forget what's going on around the world, it's a comedy club. And I think people are realizing they need live entertainment, and that's why they're getting out. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah.
Feel free to argue.
I just think podcasting probably has a big part of that too, because now people, it's almost like you bring your audience if you have a big enough podcast. So that thing you were saying about ingratiating yourself to the audience is already done for you, because you got a room full of people that love your show already.
A lot of entertainers use podcasts, but it used to, remember just a few years ago, it was blogs, right? And before that, it was cassettes of their material. I mean, the technology is changing, and so people are using different formats, social media and podcasts, for example, to share the material and share who they are as a marketing tool. So that, like you said, when they get to the Comedy Store or the Improv or some of the, the Ice House, some of these clubs, they have a little bit of a following. We're kind of talking two different subjects. One's kind of promoting and branding yourself, and the other is, once you get in that stage and you have an audience, you're dealing with the woke environment, and can you be the way stand-up comedy is meant to be, which is the last bastion of free speech. When I was doing it, we had Bobcat Goldthwait, Bobby Slayton, Jack Marion, some really terrific comics, Sam Kinison. But imagine a Sam Kinison going on stage and screaming at the audience about religion and about sex and about ethnicity. I mean, it's mind-boggling how things have changed, and it's only been, a decade or so.
Yeah. And I feel like with all these new machinations or whatever, it's kind of oversaturated the genre of comedy, because what a lot of these social media stars are realizing, they get a rude awakening. If they didn't go the traditional route of getting on a stage and doing a stand-up routine, they have this celebrity about them, and then they start doing it. And then what they realize is like, there's a complete different, it's a different world from being funny in these videos where I'm doing bits and I have a shtick, and then just being a stand-up comedian.
Oh, that's a great point, Steve. I've as I said, I talk to professional comics every week, and it's so interesting because only a few of them, I mean, not everybody was able to convert working in front of a live audience where it's really instant and interactive, and being able to do it in a Zoom call or a webinar, or dry bar comedy or something. It's a whole different experience. And I'll give you a real easy example. If you get a comic and he does a joke on stage, he's immediately getting laughter or applause or boos or something, gets some response. You're doing it to a camera, hey, why did the chicken cross the road? And you don't even know how long to do the pregnant pause because there's no, reaction from the audience. So trying to do comedy on a Zoom call or a webinar is a whole different beast. And some people have made money teaching how to do that. Well, then the reverse is true. And I think, Steve, this is what you're mentioning, is the last year and a half, the entertainers that could adapt to online entertainment, now they're getting back on stage and the audience is like right there in their face with a reaction, good or bad. It's an adjustment. I mean, I think one of the career lines that have had the most difficult challenge in this last year and a half is the entertainment industry. Singers, dancers, jugglers, ventriloquists, you name it, but stand-up comics they were literally put out of business. And then they tried to pivot and react. And now it's kind of coming back, but it's kind of not. You can go to Florida and everything's wide open. And here in California, I got to mask up in in some sort of, special yellow suit to go to the drugstore.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Well, plus also, I think like being famous, we could doing the web stuff is one thing, but like if let's use a guy I can think of that's doing stand-up. Do you know who Jeremy Piven is, Scott? He's an actor.
No, I don't know Jeremy. I'm sorry.
He's just a comedic actor. He's been famous in Hollywood. He was on a show called Entourage way back, and he was very famous in acting. But I think like that kind of fame, when you go on stage and you think you can be a stand-up comedian too, you get probably like 2 or 3 minutes from a crowd going, hey, this is the guy. This is the guy from that. And then if you're not good, it doesn't matter how fucking famous you are. They'll call the Sandman out to sweep you off the stage if they got to, because some of those people don't understand that.
You familiar with Jimmy Walker?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
AJ.
Dynamite.
Yeah.
Right. So I booked him at my club and he came in and he was going through this bitter about being off TV stage, and he refused to say dynamite on stage. And so we say, hey, the star of this TV show, Jimmy Walker's going to be here. And this big crowd filled up the audience and was all excited to see Jimmy Walker scream dynamite. And he didn't do it. And talk about the audience having an expectation and the entertainer being so selfish and unaware, not even feeding off his own celebrity. It was so upsetting. I spent a lot of money on it too. And the audience and I did not get what we paid for.
Dang, that's great. He just didn't want to do it. That's wild.
This is years after Good Times.
Huh?
This is years after Good Times.
Yeah, it was a few years after Good Times, and he was famous because of that line. I mean, people recognize it from the TV show, but that would be like hiring Harry Anderson, the magician, from Night Court and Cheers, and he comes in and he doesn't do any magic. It was like, that's the character, right? It doesn't make any sense. And so, Jimmy Walker's not one of my favorite entertainers. He kind of burned me. But,
man,
he was going through his own personal stuff, and that was more important to him than the audience. Those things happen. But, you brought up in the intro, and we should probably jump into it, one of the more interesting entertainers that I worked with, Vince Champ.
Yeah, very wild story. Steve, do you want to sort of give everybody a little cliff notes of Vince Champ?
Well, Vince Champ, at the time when Scott knew him, he was a budding, up-and-coming stand-up comedian, and he was crushing it. He was crushing the local scene. He even, I believe he was a winner in Star Search.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he won Star Search. So it's like, yeah, you win Star Search, especially at that time. Like, yeah, you got it, man. You that's your ticket. And then he took his celebrity even further, and he started hitting the college tours. And throughout that time when he was going from college city to college city, let's just say he was taking sex.
Well, that's softer that's more diplomatic than rape. But yeah. he was making himself known to certain women without a proper introduction.
Yeah.
Very
diplomatic way to say he was a serial rapist, Steve. But
right.
He was, he was.
So here's the backstory. He was an up and coming comic. He worked for me when he was just cutting his teeth. He started off as an opening act and then a feature act. He was really clean. He was a Christian comic. He was very funny. He was one of our favorite regulars. Then he won Star Search and got a little celebrity, and we weren't able to afford him as much. And I think he just worked for us once or twice after that. But this is all in the late 80s and early 90s. But he took that celebrity, like Steve alluded to, and he was really popular on the college tour and was touring the nation, college to college. There's these tours that are set up by bookers in Los Angeles, and he was going around the country. And somewhere in the mid to late 80s, he had issues, obviously, and started raping co-eds in these college towns. And because he was constantly changing schools and jurisdictions for the police and states, because he would go to college, state to state, it wasn't until the late 90s, early 2000. I'm not sure when he got arrested. Steve, do you know? I didn't do the research.
I believe it was in the 90s, if I'm not mistaken.
Had to be late in the 90s then. Yeah. But they were finally able to match his tour itinerary to the cases and accusations of rape, and they were able to prosecute him. And now he's doing like 2 life sentences in prison.
Yeah.
So that's a funny guy.
I mean, that's it kind of lends to the stereotypical, like, all stand-up comedians are damaged individual, that kind of thing. But this is a hyper damaged guy. And I just always thought it's such a weird, I don't know what to call it. It's just like 2 differing personalities. This guy can get up on stage and make everybody laugh. He's a Christian comic, which adds another layer of it that's even crazier.
Well, he obviously had issues, and it was very, maybe one of the terms is ironic or what, but he was so pleasant and so nice on stage and even off stage. We spent lots of times, we took him bowling. He was one of the regular guys that we were happy to hang out with, and a favorite of my office manager at the time, who helped me with the bookings. And again, this is years before something snapped in him and he went to this illegal task. But it is so poignant to explain to people how you really don't know somebody. We thought we knew him. We thought of him as a friend and somebody we worked with over several years. And then, something happened in his future, and he transitioned into, as Steve mentioned earlier, a serial rapist. And it's almost befuddling to understand how could somebody with success, you win Star Search, you got money, you got celebrity, you're somebody.
Yeah.
Back then it was a big deal. It's like winning America's Got Talent now, right? Yeah. Wouldn't you say that's a comparison?
Yeah, that's definitely.
Yeah, somebody that wins that can go out for at least a year or two just on that title. Hey, I just won, the 1992 Star Search show. That will carry you for several years. So he was making good money. He was entertaining all over the country, did his fair share of TV, and to have that transition to serial rapist is just mind-boggling, scary. I don't know. It's certainly worth, somebody should do a podcast on it.
Oh, there have been. There have been episodes on this gentleman, and there are YouTube videos on. It's kind of like one of those true Hollywood story kind of deals. I've seen. There's a couple.
Where are they now?
Where are they now?
Yeah.
You know,
I think they did a SVU episode based off of this story too. Like they dramatized this for television as well, like a stand-up comedian.
Oh, I didn't see that. I don't think.
I think it was SVU. It was one of them.
I hope they didn't mention working for me. But I can top that. So,
I feel you, Scott.
let me share something else, because I think that for your audience under this topic, what we're trying to do is share how you think you know somebody and you may not. Two quick stories if you have time.
Please. That's why you're here.
One was there was an open micer that pretty much sucked, and he came to my Monday night open mics over and over, and I got to know him, and I was trying to help him, and I was giving him some guidance, and all of a sudden I get this 5-page handwritten letter, and it starts off with how he hates me and I've ruined his life. I wasn't promoting him. I wouldn't book him into the show because he wasn't good. And that's like the first 2 pages is how horrible and everything were. Then the next 2 pages were he loved me and I, inspired him and he wanted to be around me. And then the last page, he threatened to kill me. Right. Wow. So this is all like this 5-page letter. So I knew the guy. I considered him harmless. I didn't report it to the police. I just like filed it away. We said he wasn't welcome in the club anymore. And, I moved on. Fast forward about a year, and out of the blue, I got a phone call from Sinbad.
Okay.
Star and comic, right? You know Sinbad.
Yeah, of course, yeah. We love Sinbad.
Famous stand-up comic and done several movies. Sinbad calls me, and he hadn't worked for me. We weren't friends or acquaintances even. And I answer the phone, and hey, this is Sinbad. It's like, okay. and he goes on to tell me how he got a 5-page letter from this guy that loved him, hated him, and threatened to kill him. And Sinbad started like freaking out because he didn't know the guy like I did. He wasn't from, Sinbad was in LA and when this guy approached him, but I knew him for a long time in Sacramento. And Sinbad was like, I started asking around about this guy and people told me to talk to you. And I told him about my 5-page letter. And then we kind of laughed about it, but then he was really serious. He was like, well, I'm ready to report this to the FBI. Now, again, Sinbad was a huge celebrity at the time. He still had movies coming out. This is in the, I think it was the late 80s. And
he was on Different World at that time.
Yeah. Things were happening for him and he was just freaked out. So I kind of gave him my 2 cents. I explained that I knew the guy, that I'd known him for a couple of years as an open micer, and that my opinion was he was not a risk, that he was a kook, he was nuts, but that in my mind, my life wasn't really at risk. Now that might have been not my place to say, but he asked my opinion and I shared it with him. And he let it go. And then it was funny, about 3 years later, I actually ran into him backstage at a big concert and said, by the way, I'm Scott Edwards from Laughs Unlimited. He goes, oh, the letter guy. Sinbad and I sat for like half an hour just chit-chatting about this shared weird ass experience that we had both encountered. So that's one that's not, that story hasn't been told very much, maybe once before. So your listeners are getting the inside scoop.
Inside.
Did he ever get to the point of climbing the ranks of comedy in any?
No. Okay. He was not mentally or emotionally capable of dealing with, being a stand-up comic, as Matt would know, you've been on stage, is really challenging. It's scary. And you're trying to bond and connect with 50 to 100 to 200 people. And if you don't have, he was socially awkward, right? You remember those people that would try really hard to engage and then end up really, ending, well, in high school, they would be the one that everybody would know that he was awkwardly,
Yeah, it's the guy you don't want to get in a conversation with because you're like, this is just gonna get fucking weird as shit.
Yeah, you don't know where it's going, right? So he was one of those people. So no, he never went anywhere, and I really don't know what happened to him. So I have one other story that to top the Vince Champ one, and again, this has only been told once before. But
I just gotta say one thing though. Did you and Sinbad like review your letters? Did he replace your name with Sinbad's name and just copy and paste, or did he send you different letters? Because now I'm thinking this guy had no creativity. He even copy and pasted a letter.
Yeah, no. I take the liberty as a creator to embellish a little bit. My letter was actually 5 pages. I believe that Sinbad's was 3, but it was basically the same content where how much I love you, how much I hate you, and I'm going to kill you.
Wow.
So if it's the content's the same, 3 pages or 5 pages, it was still the same experience. Really weird.
Scott, to be a fly on the wall during the Sinbad conversation, listening, knowing how he is, man, I ain't got time for this shit. I'm doing movies with Tom Hardy and Phil Hartman, man. What the fuck? I mean, I'm with Whitley Gilbert and Dwayne Wayne, man. I ain't got time for this shit, man. Who the fuck?
What's interesting is I don't get starstruck. I kind of, don't have that gene because of who I am and the people I've worked with. I mean, I had Tom Hanks on my stage. I mean, it's really hard to impress me. But I was not a friend or an acquaintance of Sinbad, and he was a huge star at the time, still is. And when I got the phone call, it was just like, out of the blue Twilight Zone stuff. Like, why would he be calling me? And then when I ran into him backstage at that show, it was a little, I would say I probably had a little apprehension even approaching him, just because.
He's a big guy.
Yeah, but when you have a shared experience like that, you got to say, hey, remember that guy?
I mean, that guy's he's had a Hollywood career and he remembered that. So that shows you how fucking crazy that is. He's like,
I don't think his life has been threatened very often because he was really taken aback by it. He was far more concerned than I was, but I knew the guy and he didn't. So interesting. So the last story. And again, now what we've done is we've taken your audience down the path of the really weird and bizarre of the stand-up comedy world. This is not normal, and this is not the kind of stuff anybody's ever heard of. But I had a guy that was an open micer. He had worked for me a few times as an open micer. We had a comedy competition, and I think he finished in the top 10. And as that, I booked him as an opening act. And he was scheduled to open up on a Tuesday. This is back in the 80s. And on Monday, literally the day before he was supposed to start, I get a phone call from the police. I won't give his whole name, but his name was Maurice. Had been shot and killed while leaving the residence, an apartment. He'd broken into an apartment and raped a woman. And as he was leaving, the sheriffs were chasing him through a ditch, and he looked like he was going to defend himself, and they blew him away.
Jesus.
And what was, now I'm going to take it even, so that's bizarre in itself, right? This is even before the Sinbad thing. So this was my first experience with interacting with somebody, and this is way before Vince Champ. This was just, here's a guy that was on my stage. I decided to book him. He's about to go to work for me the next day, and wow, he's gone. He's dead, right? Well, it gets even more bizarre because the next day for the local news, and this name, if you don't know it, be sure to go to the Googler and look it up. There's a famous or infamous female reporter, Christine Kraft. I don't know if you remember, but she took it to the Supreme Court because she got fired for being too old and too ugly for TV. So there's this weird backstory, but it was so funny because she wanted to interview me about this guy Maurice was going to work my club. So I said, sure, because, press is press. plus I didn't want to hide the fact, make it look like, somehow my business was involved or new. And so I explained that we didn't have any idea of who he was and that he had just been an open micer. This was going to be his first time working. And I thought Christine and I had kind of an idea of where the interview for the news was going to go. And they turn on the cameras and she lifts up her mic and she goes, "So Scott, when you booked Maurice as an opening act, did you know he was a rapist?"
Oh my God.
That's how she starts it.
And this is on TV, right? Live. Oh, it's live to tape, but I mean, it was, they were recording everything. And I was just flabbergasted that she would even ask such an asinine question, but I couldn't lose my composure in front of the camera. So, and I think that's what she was trying to do. She was trying to elicit some crazy reaction. And I just, composed myself and I said, "Well, no, actually, we weren't aware that he had any proclivities towards illicit activities, and I explained that he had just been an open micer and that he was about to have his very first quote unquote paid gig, but he had not actually even worked my club yet, and that we were shocked and appalled to hear about his activity and his death." But I mean, this Christine Kraft was just such a bad, dirty reporter. She was just right in my face. "Well, shouldn't you be, vetting these people before they go on stage?" I go, "No, it's comedy." I mean, anybody that signs up for open mic can get on stage,
Yeah.
and I cut the interview pretty short because I was not happy with how she was taking it. But those are my three bizarre stories that involve illicit activity and crimes. There's more, but these are the most interesting and follows in Steve's line of thought about Vince Champ.
Yeah, well played though, by the way. Game, set, and match, Scott.
Yeah, that's tough. Like if somebody just blindsides you, like, "Hey, Steve, I'm here with local scumbag Steve Garrett. Did you know this guy was raping people before you hired him?"
Hey, aren't you the old lady that's too ugly for the news? I'm petty. You're better than me, Scott. I'm petty as hell because it's like, if we gonna do this, bitch, let's do this.
Well, the Christine Kraft part of the story actually happened several years later. She was like one of the top reporters in our little hub of the world at the time, and it was a few years later that she was let go. I think it was for bad reporting and because of what she did to me. And she did that to everybody. She was one of those gotcha reporters. But she sued saying that, "No, you fired me because I was old and ugly." And she was.
Oh, so that was her argument.
Yeah, that was her argument.
Oh, see, okay, yeah, man.
We all agreed. No, we agreed she was old and ugly, but that's not why they fired her.
Yeah, man.
She was just trying to get money. She was one of those people that when she was a reporter, she was kind of a got you reporter where she was always trying to make something that, "Hey, you opened a new restaurant." "Yeah, but they sold drugs in there." She was always trying to catch people in a bad way. And I think that it was her talent as a reporter is what got her fired. She sued saying it was age discrimination and I got ugly. I mean, she wouldn't, I don't know how she put it, but she took it to court and went all the way up to the Supreme Court.
"Your Honor, I was fired because I'm ugly." And the judge is like, "I see it.
That's not legal. I want you give me money. I'll go get a facelift."
I'm sure if you look deep enough on her resume, it says Fox News somewhere. Like I hate those. I hate those kind of people. Like it just in general, like people like they're making up their own their own reasonings as to why things didn't go their way without looking in the mirror. Like, "Oh, she turned me down because she thinks I'm too fat." Like, no, bro, your personality sucks. Like you're not even trying. Right. Like you're unpleasant to be around. Right. Like, "Oh, nobody will be friends with me because I'm ugly." Okay, that's partially true, but like you say weird shit. Okay, work on being on your social skills.
Yeah, it's kind of surreal looking back on it. And again, this was back, 30, 40 years ago. But what's interesting about it is when you go into the business of stand-up comedy and you're going to be running a restaurant, a bar, and you're providing entertainment, and you kind of understand that with the entertainers, you're getting this weird class of people because some do drugs, some drink a lot, some, that what you're getting in for pretty much with the entertainers. But these three instances were kind of my total history in my 21 years as a club owner. These three times I somehow got involved in the kind of the twilight zone of dealing with people that you would not know by looking at them.
Yeah.
That they were going to be, the guy that sent me the death letter. I mean, I didn't even know the guy knew my name. I didn't know his until I got the letter, right? I mean, I kind of knew who he was, but it wasn't anybody, I get 20, 30 people every open mic. You don't make personal connections with each and every one of them until they start working for you. And the Maurice guy, he was, all this happened within a couple months time. So there wasn't much interaction. And then the Vince Champ one, I think is the most interesting from the standpoint that we really liked him and he worked for us for many years and was a clean, appropriate, funny comic for all those years. In fact, as we've already alluded to, when he became and was doing his serial rapist part of his job, he was still going on stage at these colleges and doing, huge, funny, clean shows. I mean, that's like a Jekyll and Hyde thing, right?
Especially to add the Christianity label to his comedy too. I mean, that seems to add like a different level of darkness to it.
Well, I don't want to mislead anybody. He was an overt Christian comedy. I just knew that he was a Christian and that's why he preferred doing clean comedy. And that it was reported, and Steve has read the reports, when he was actually raping somebody and they were tied up, he would pray over him and say, I'm sorry, please forgive me. He wasn't like an angry beat him up kind of. I mean, I don't want to get into it. It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
But it was a bizarre type of rape. It wasn't your what we would think of as a rape. Does that make sense? That's weird.
No.
There's added darkness to it. Like he was doing more than just the act itself type shit.
You could tell he had psychological issues.
Yeah.
And I've always looked at comedians as like superheroes to me, because there's a certain level of courage to do this and be great at it and excel at it. What Vince Champ did was kind of like a reverse. Like he was Superman during the day, and then but he went into the phone booth and he became actually like Lex Luthor.
Well, I was just watching a 2019 Spider-Man movie where Mysterio, I think was the superhero's name, was the good guy for most of the movie. And then it turned out he was the bad guy. Yeah. And was secretly being the bad guy. And nobody knew it. I mean, it's one of those, here's a guy that's really funny and clean and entertaining on stage. But what he does is and here's the thing that's interesting is what somebody does in their private time normally is private. If a guy's an alcoholic or a drug addict or has proclivities to, sleeping with animals, and he's doing it in his own time, it's really no one's business. But, Vince Champ went down this serial rapist road and it's like just shocking. Well, when it happened, we didn't believe it at first. We thought, oh, this has to be a mistake. I mean, that would be like, Matt, what you were saying, if you all of a sudden you found out your next door neighbor had killed somebody, you'd go, Bob?
Yeah, no. Well, especially it's a guy who's made you laugh. And so it's like, real? No way. You almost have to just disavow everything. And something I want to add to this that just sort of give background and what the day-to-day is like. Knowing stand-up comedian, you were a businessman that owned a comedy club. In that regard, how much are you interacting with the comedians? Do some of them just come in and it's like a job and they just come in, do what they got to do, and you don't have a lot of interaction? I mean, what's it like for a club owner?
It's this. You're absolutely correct, and that's a great question, Matt. A lot of, it's like life. You can go to work and there's 50 other employees. Some of them become your friends. Some of them you just say hi in the hallway, and some won't give you the time of day, right?
Yeah.
So comics or entertainers of any type are just normal people. So some of them are very gregarious, and you become friends, which, by the way, we did with Vince Champ. Very outgoing. They would go bowling with us, or we would go out and have a meal late night or something. And then you have others that, they're professional. They come in, they interact with you politely when they're on your property and on your stage. But when they go back to the condo, leave them alone. We didn't have too many that were, like didn't want to interact to the point of being rude. I think the difference would be some were very professional, and their private time was their private time, and the other is they're hanging out with the other comics, they're hanging out with the staff, and they're your buddy, right? I had one comic, a famous guy, who was an alcoholic and a drug user, but he would leave the show, go out and find the nearest gambling hall or card room, and lose all his money to gambling. Jeez. And it's like, we didn't know what he was doing. It wasn't our business, but we found out because he would come to us and go, I need it in advance because I don't have enough money to get home.
Wow.
Right? What he did when he left the club wasn't really my business, but then all of a sudden he made it my business because he wanted money.
Literally your business.
Yeah.
Like in a sense, Scott, as long as you were doing this, did you kind of feel like you were babysitting these adults from time to time?
Oh yeah. Oh no, that Steven, that you nailed it right there. Ding, 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 ding. It's when you own a business, you are basically babysitting your employees, right? You have to make them show up on time. They have to look a certain way. They have to act a certain way. And your job as their mentor or boss is to kind of make sure that they do what they're supposed to do. So that's a normal owning a business boss kind of job. And sometimes it's referred to as babysitting. But entertainers, definitely. There were a few prima donnas, right? That, I'm a huge star. And, literally I had played bouncer or bodyguard for somebody that may be or thought they were a big enough star that they felt at risk if they were in public. And so I was their bodyguard as they would enter or leave the club. Now, I didn't take on that role once they were gone, but there was a couple guys that, and we're talking men, it happens with women too, but hey, I'm going to be arriving at this time. The limo's going to drop me off. I want an escort from the limo into the club. Once I'm in the green room, no one's allowed in the green room except the other entertainers and you. And then after, I want you to escort me back out.
Oh, wow.
And that's you're just going along with how somebody, fears their life or runs their life. It's strange though, right, Steve? You just get
it is.
Everybody's got a different, concern. I call them Piccadillys. Somebody's, thinks of, most people are pretty normal, and most people are pretty, you can interact with them in a normal way. But you get these odd situations, and you just, if you're a pro or forced to, as I was as the boss, you just deal with it. You just find a way to make it work. If I didn't want to be somebody's bodyguard and I said, no, I'm not going to do that, they're going to go, well, I'm not coming to your club. And if I wanted them, right, you gotta kind of play the game.
Now, of the ones who demanded that kind of star treatment, was it warranted? Are they flourishing now?
No, I think it's mostly in their own heads. I think the ones that are actual celebrities have adapted, right? So when we would have Jay Leno, after he'd already hosted the Tonight Show, not his own show, but he'd been on as a guest host and he'd been on the show. He was definitely famous. Jay is still a pretty down-to-earth guy. He doesn't want to be mobbed, and if we would take our responsibility to make sure that nobody bothered him when he was not on stage, but he would never say, oh, I need, a bodyguard or protection. But then you'll have somebody else that may have done one TV show or one thing, but their ego and their insecurities were such that they wanted more pampering. I mean, we've all heard about the rock and roll star that wanted only brown M&Ms.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's people have weird requests. I used to get contracts where they would say, well, we want 3 kinds of water and we want a fruit tray and a vegetable tray and all this in the green room. And I go, no. This is a normal everyday comedy club. You're going to get the same crap everybody else gets.
Yeah.
Tell you what, we won't charge him for food. How about that?
For real.
But that wasn't usually the entertainer, by the way, for your audience. It's not always the entertainers. A lot of times the management of the entertainers or the booking organization would put in these demands in the contract so that they could go back to the entertainer and say, look what we did for you. Right? Does that make sense?
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
They want to look good to their, Jay Leno's agency wanted to look good to Jay. So they put in the contract that he has all this extra crap. And Jay goes, I don't care.
Yeah, he probably doesn't even know
because
about
they want to
it.
make it. Yeah, they want to look good.
I just need the Doritos. Just give me the Doritos.
Nice job.
So you got a new movie coming out.
Yeah.
But it's funny that we've talked about Jay Leno and Jimmy Walker because from what I've read, Jay Leno and David Letterman used to be writers for Jimmy Walker when they first started, right?
Yeah,
Oh,
well,
wow.
there's a lot of crossover in entertainment, especially in comedy, because a lot of these people were writing for other people and then all of a sudden got in front of the camera, right? The Saturday Night Live is one of the big shows for that, where somebody, Conan O'Brien was a writer for years, and then all of a sudden, got his fame. But a lot of these people wrote before or did something else. I know a lot of comics that were, I don't know if you've heard of this, show warm-up guys.
Yeah.
All sitcoms have an entertainer go out before they start a live taping, let's say Big Bang Theory, and they would have a comic or like host go out and kind of warm up the audience, tell them how this is going to work, when to applaud, when not to applaud, kind of do a few jokes, talk about the actors and stuff. And they're called a show warm-up. And there's guys that have been behind the camera as a show warm-up, and then they'll need them for something, and they get in front of the camera, and then somebody goes, oh, he's pretty good. And then he ends up getting a show.
Yeah, that show warm-up thing has got to be a brutal job for stand-up comedians, because we went to like Conan O'Brien a few times, in the last few years, and to see what those guys have to do, because it's all about energy and, not so like the guy doesn't come out and everybody's all tired and shit. So they might be out there for like an hour and a half, like, get the t-shirt cannon out. Let's do a dance routine. Like, get out, it's just all about like keeping the audience hyped up. And that's another thing. That's like the different things you can do as a stand-up to still do stand-up, but it's like a different format. It's wild,
Right. And Matt, you nailed it. You're a combination MC and stand-up. And what people, let's say normal people don't realize, to shoot a half-hour sitcom could take 2.5 hours easy, right? They don't just turn on the camera and a half hour later the show's over. No, they're doing this scene, that scene. They're changing sets. There's all this dead time. And it's a lot of responsibility to keep, like you said, Matt, keep the audience engaged.
I mean, you can tell those guys are just
not everybody
sweating. And sometimes they don't get any reaction. It's just them out there just pouring their hearts out, just dying a slow death in front of this crowd of people that want to watch, Ellen or something like that.
Right.
Right.
And it's, I don't know, maybe because I'm sick, but I kind of like watching people bomb in person because it makes me feel better about life. Like, oh, I'm not that guy.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because in my book, and on my online course, it's so important that people understand you're going to fail at times. You're going to bomb at times. It's part of the process. You can't be upset about it. You can't take it personally. You have to learn from it and move on and grow from it. But not everybody can do that. For example, Mr. 5-page letter, you give him, an honest critique. You know what? I don't think you're going to make it as a stand-up comic. Right? They go nuts. But anybody that's serious about being in comedy or any sort of entertainment is you have to expect and understand there's going to be times the audience, and it's not always even your fault. You could have an audience that just doesn't coagulate into a group thing. You might have one person laughing and 99 people not. You're going to feel like you're bombing, but it might be those 99 just got a ticket that day or something. I mean, you never know. But I mean, I've had bad audiences in my 21 years experience. There was a couple times, doesn't happen often, but you'll get a majority of poop heads that take over the energy of the room, as opposed to normally it's mostly happy, fun, energized people that end up converting the poop heads, right? But it can go both ways.
I mean, sometimes you just can't explain it. Because I remember one time we went to a New Year's Eve show at the Comedy Store. It was New Year's Eve. We're like, oh, let's go enjoy a laugh before midnight or whatever. It was a hot day. David Spade he was like hosting. These were not like open mic comedians by any means. And it was just, even the comedians themselves were like, guys, what is going on here? Jeff Garland was in the room, like did an act, and he actually got some laughs. Yeah. But even he was like, I'm never doing a New Year's Eve show again, guys. This is it. Because it was just like you couldn't get any energy out of the room. It was wild.
Yeah, New Year's is a tough, people think everybody's in a good mood and wants to party, but it's also the biggest night for suicides. People have a different view of New Year's, and they're almost determined to get drunk before, it's a day that's like you have permission to overdrink, right?
Well, so plus everybody's thinking about what they're going to do at midnight. No one's going to see a comedy show at midnight. They're at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock. And I think that's what everybody was saying is like, hey guys, you can get out of here and go to whatever you're trying to go do. Like, obviously this ain't working. So.
Right. And it's a tough evening. I did, of course, 21 years of New Year's, and I used to do 2. I would do a 9 o'clock show where we celebrated New York New Year's, and then a midnight show where we had California New Year's. And we'd use the trash and the mess from the first show to help decorate the second show, right? But it is all about letting people know. And I think it depends on the MC, to be honest. It's important that the MC explains the situation to the group. Say, look, we know you got stuff planned, or we know you have anticipations for later, but for right now, you've invested, you've bought a ticket. Let's get you into this show. And I got a great comic for you, right? I mean, but you said it added to the fact that it was really especially hot that day. And people in LA don't take to a lot of heat and humidity if it happens once in a while, especially in middle of winter.
Well, I think it was just a bunch of beautiful people that were just waiting to go to some cool party, But I just remember thinking the same thing you just said, like, this should have been like a home run. Like, we're out here all trying to get fucked up and have a good time and stuff. And man, that night I almost was putting myself in like their shoes, because they were everybody was coming out and going like, geez, guys, what is going on here?
Well, it's a great example where you can have terrific comedy talent, and if the audience isn't buying it and isn't up for it, there's nothing you can do. Comedy is a shared experience, right? Like a singer can go out and sing, and she doesn't need the audience to be there or not. You could have 5 people or 500 people. And by the way, we're trained from birth, when somebody stops a song, they applaud, whether you liked it or not. It's just something we're taught as children. But comics don't get that. If you don't do a good set, people don't burst into applause when you're done.
Yeah. Unless you're killing it that hard, but
right,
man.
So we've touched a lot of different things. What do you want the topic of the podcast to be?
I mean, it's really just stand up, but I did want to pivot, because you're giving us all this like good comedy insight and about being a stand up and a club owner. So I think
I shared some strange stories too.
and some strangeness, but that's all part of it, dealing with that. And I
Our
wanted
show
to
is
pivot
strange.
to the book Steve and I you shared with us, which is called Be a Stand-Up Comic or Just Look Like One, a comedy career guide. And I said before we started recording how much I wish, and again, guys, for all reference, I only did stand-up comedy live one time, and it was so rough I couldn't do it again. But
you'll get back out there. I have faith.
You never know. Me and Steve have talked about doing live shows, and I think that'd be a good way for us to do something where we ease into it a little bit. But back then, I was intimidated because I was broke. I had no idea what to do other than do open mic comedy. And beyond that, it was just, I have no idea what to do to start my journey here. And I just wish I would have had your book back then. I wish I would have known you to pull all this information from, because it's interesting. I think stand-up comedy is a career that, even acting, it's more, I think it's much more interesting. It's much less defined as to how you become a successful stand-up comedian. Now it's a little more defined because of podcasts, but I think.
But you make a good point, and I'm going to take your lead and explain that if you want to be a professional, famous singer, you can go through singing lessons and practice and practice and practice. And if you want to be an actor, you can go to acting school, learn how to act, and then start off in small local community plays and work your way up to Broadway, right? Stand-up comedy is similar and dissimilar. It's similar in that you want to, everybody, including Jay Leno and Jerry Seinfeld, start off with open mics somewhere, and they bomb and they struggle and they have to write. You got to work at it if you want it as a career. But what's unique about stand-up comedy is, unlike singing or acting, where you can really suck and learn to be good, stand-up comedy, you kind of either have it or you don't. And but getting on stage is the beginning. But once you're on stage, you have to have the work ethic to hone that talent to something that's good enough for a career. So thanks for mentioning my book, Be a Stand-Up Comic or Just Look Like One. I used it to recently launch an online course. So you can find it at Scott's Comedy, want to get this right, scottscomedystuff.com, my new website, scottscomedystuff.com, very fancy name. And you'll find this online course that really, I use the book as the guide, and it walks you through from, do you really want to be in this business? Do you understand the hard work it's going to take? Okay, you do. So here's what happens. You become an open micer. Okay, after you're an open micer for so long, you're going to be an opening act. Then you're going to be a featured act. Okay, if you're really good and you stay at it and you work hard, you'll be a headliner. Okay, now you're a headliner. What's it going to take to get the golden ticket to be seen by an agent and maybe get a TV show or get invited on something? And this book walks you through those steps. But it starts off, and you read it, you understand the first chapter or two are like, hey, is this something you really want to do? It's tough. We didn't want, mamby-pamby people getting into the business, and we should point out that this was written in an effort to help people decide if they really wanted to get into comedy or not. In other words, we don't paint rosy, flowers and unicorn pictures about the industry. If anything, we go the other direction. We tell you all the terrors and the frights and the failures that you're going to face if you go into this industry. But if you keep reading the book, then we say, okay, from a producer's point of view, not from a comic's point of view, but from a producer that has produced some of the best talent ever to exist in stand-up comedy, this is what you need to do. And in that regard, I think it's both the course and the book are worthy of attention. But yeah, I'm the author, so what do you know?
Like you mentioned the different tropes of comedians earlier in the book, and one of them that stood out was I can't remember the terminology used, but it's like the fuck shit piss ass comedian. Right. Throughout your tenure, how many of those comedians did you encounter?
So many amateurs think that using shock humor and dropping the F-bomb, when you drop the F-bomb for no funny reason in a set, you're going to get a reaction from the audience because people generally day to day don't do that when they're at work, right? Or when they're with their family. I mean, there's always exceptions, but the general audience are shocked when you throw in an F-bomb for no reason. Here's what's interesting. Because the audience reacts, those amateurs think that makes them funny. The reality is the audience is just reacting. They're not laughing.
It's a nervous reaction.
Exactly. Oh, Steve, perfect. That's exactly what it is. It's a nervous, knee-jerk reaction to hearing swearing, right? I went to the freaking store to get some freaking bread because it was freaking Monday. Well, the audience is like, whoa, I don't hear that every day. But is that
gratuitous?
Yeah, damn.
Yeah. Is that humor or just the way your Uncle Billy talks?
Yeah, man. And like also, were any of those blue comics that you worked with, did any of them cross over into like bigger fame and switch up their act because of that?
We know people. Here's a real easy example. Who's the 90s television famous dad? It's Bob Saget.
Allen. Oh, Bob Saget. Oh, yeah.
I was gonna say.
What did you say?
He said Tim Allen.
Well, Tim Allen's a great example too. He's not really Tim Allen did have a dirtier act than he perceives on TV, but the easiest to say is Bob Saget. On Full House, he's the dad, he's Mr. Clean, he's raising girls, right? And I think 3 girls. And on stage, one of the filthiest acts you ever saw. And he does swear, but he doesn't swear for the sake of swearing. It's just part of his material.
It's his seasoning. It's just like with food. You add too much seasoned salt, it just takes away from the recipe. It's like you got to know.
Well, Bob Saget is really funny on stage. And here's a great story that's a true story. So Bob was a regular at my club. He was one of the first acts. He helped me. He was in my first TV commercial. He helped direct it. We're good friends. And Bob got famous on Full House. And he came back and worked my club. Why? Because we were friends. And him and Dave Coulier did a New Year's show for me. And we had these moms calling and say, oh, I want to bring my kids to see, Tanner from Full House. And we're going, no,
this is not Danny Tanner.
Yeah, this is not Danny Tanner. This is 21 and over. And I'm telling you, from a parent to a parent, you don't want your kids seeing Bob Saget live. And we wouldn't let them in. And then the few that brought, like older kids, because we were 18 and over, but you'd get somebody, the parents and the kids would come in, but the kids were, 18. And they were like shocked. They thought they were going to see Full House. And what they got was, and a lot of people don't know this, Bob's a really talented musician. And he would sing these really funny songs that were just filthy, really funny. And they're not F-bomb songs. They were just, anyway, I can't give examples, but hilarious. If that, I'm going to send you that online course. In there is a video. Well, you know what? Let's plug this, guys. I have a membership site on scottscomedystuff.com, and for a small fee, you can get access to videos, not just audio, but video memories of these famous acts on stage from the 80s and 90s. And there's a whole set or two by Bob Saget.
Well, you mentioned him and Dave Coulier. They both get a special thanks at the beginning of your book as well. So they've obviously been a huge impact on your career and your club. So that's very cool. Coulier
was at my bachelor party. I mean, we're good friends.
Cool. Yeah. I just remember being so shocked because I was aware that Bob Saget, after he got out of Full House and me and Steve were getting older, he was in movies where, he'd have a line or something where he'd say he was in a movie called Half Baked. And his only line in it was basically, I suck dick for Coke. That was his line. So it was like, you saw him in this light. But I remember when I was in college, a movie called The Aristocrats came out. And I think that's where mainstream people that were just comedy fans became aware of the fact that Bob Saget is really one of the most dirtiest comics that you'll ever hear. That's good.
Let's explain to the audience that there's a famous old joke called The Aristocrats. that's been around since the days of the Catskills. And somebody decided to make a movie, more of a documentary, where he went to, I think it's like 20 or 30
It's a lot. Yeah.
Famous actors and comics to tell their version of the story. The one that won, the one that was considered the dirtiest, was Bob Saget.
Yeah.
Out of 20 plus entertainers, who told the dirtiest version of the joke? Bob Saget. And you're like, that's the Full House, Dad? And now it's Fuller House, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's still going. So he's got a real Jekyll and Hyde experience himself.
Yeah, there's a funny story about,
by the way,
like, the Olsen twins. Oh yeah.
No, I was just going to say, I'm saying how dirty he is. We need to say it's different than the F-bomb guys. He's really funny.
Yeah, I think it's
comedy.
like a calculated thing, and I think he takes into account his persona on TV as well. It's almost like you use that to get in the door, and then it's almost an inside joke where you're like, wait till you see what these people see me, like these Full House fans are about to hear me say. This is going to be hilarious.
Right. Steve, I interrupted you.
I was just going to say, like, there's a funny story about, like, the Olsen twins' parents being upset with Bob Saget. I guess he did some kind of off-color joke that the twins might have heard at the time. Like, this is like, before shooting or whatever. And there was like a rift.
Well, no, he and Dave Coulier and Stamos are great friends. I've had lunch with all three of them once. It was amazing. Stamos was a great guy. And they riff on each other. I don't know how long you want this podcast to go, but I have another funny short story that nobody's ever heard. This one's not even in the podcast, my podcast. By the way, we haven't plugged it. My podcast is stand-up comedy. Your host and MC. You can find it in every directory. Go listen. But in like 1981, I'm sitting after a show at a cocktail table with Dave Coulier, Bob Saget, and me. And we're just having drinks after the show. And this is years before Full House or any fame, but just really funny guys. And we're just talking, and I see Bob and Dave kind of laughing and passing something under the table, right? And I'm like, come on, guys, I'm the boss. You can't be mocking me in front of me. And then they started laughing, and they go, no, it's nothing to do with you. It's just our weird sense of humor. And they pull up the note, and Bob Saget had taken some lint from under the tablecloth, wrapped it in a paper, and passed it to Coulier, saying, here's some of my pubic hair. I want you to have it under your pillow. Just, twisted sense of humor. And these are two friends just trying to crack each other up. And it was a great moment for me to see these guys just rivet on each other as friends. But, you wouldn't tell the mother of a 6-year-old that loves Full House that Bob Saget's sharing his pubic hair with Dave Coulier.
Maybe she has a good sense of humor. That's hilarious. But, like, you said it before, like, he's still hilarious with the F-bombs, but like one of his bits, like, I remember, and I'm doing this loosely, where he's talking about, man, you shouldn't fuck that shit because that shit's fucked up. And it's just like, yeah, if you think about that's pretty witty. Like, yeah, if you do fuck that shit's fucked up.
Well, we can go back to Sam Kinison and Bobby Slayton, the bulldog of comedy and pitbull of comedy, and the Bobcat Goldthwait. There's been people that were open about, their craziness, their dirt, and been still really funny. One of my favorites was a guy named Jack Marion, and he was extremely filthy. That we would book it as a blues show, which means it's going to be dirty. If you go to Vegas or New York and you hear it's a blues show, just expect it's going to have topics like sex and stuff. And he would rarely use the F-bomb, but his humor was all about the interaction sexually of men and women. And so it was dirty, but it wasn't full of slang or F-bombs. It was just the topic was such that we felt we should warn the audience. He has an album out called Real Balls Volume 2 that's hilarious, filthy, but totally professional. And if you listen to it, you might get embarrassed, but you're going to be laughing your butt off. Jack Marion, look him up.
Jack Marion. I'll have to look. I haven't even heard that name, so I'll definitely check that out.
Well, this is old school stuff. I'm like twice your age, man.
Well, I'm a svelte 38 right now, Scott. So, but inside I'm like 60, so.
Well, I'm 66 and on the inside I'm like 16. Just ask my wife.
That's the right way that's why you have all that hair. See, we figured it out, Steve. We're just not living the right kind of life.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your show. I did it once before and found it very entertaining. You guys are great. And what's nice is that you have an interest and understand the topic that we're discussing. And I think between the three of us, we're able to share some great stories and questions with your listeners. And thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Yeah, we love having you. And I wanted to ask one thing or just point out one thing that I appreciated about your book is like somebody who wanted to learn about stand-up comedy, that it's such a simple thing that I don't think anybody puts any effort into or thought into, which was that, your book even goes as simple as acknowledging what it's like to get on stage for the first time, the lights, even like picking a mic out, those things that you don't even think about that are such, like Jerry Seinfeld, he doesn't think about that at all. It's just is what it is, or whoever. But I just thought it was really interesting and really thoughtful of you, from somebody who would want to consume your book and learn, that you go from the smallest detail, like you said, all the way up to being a successful act and those dream thoughts.
Getting TV or something.
Yeah.
So what you're talking about is the technical side, and I have a short story on that. In 1980, Bob Saget brought a friend of his up who had his own sitcom at the time called Bosom Buddies. The actor was Tom Hanks, and Tom had to do some stand-up comedy on the sitcom Bosom Buddies, but he'd never done it. So Bob brought him to my club, and I taught Tom the technical side, how the lights were going to be, how to use the mic, how to hold the mic, always have it 3 inches from your mouth. You don't need to yell. The sound man will take care of that. Things, technical side, where to stand, how to interact with the audience. Bob Saget was helping him write material for that 5 minutes on Bosom Buddies. And then what was so great for the experience, not only did I get to work with Tom, but a couple weeks later, that episode aired, and the set that he honed on my stage was on TV. Wow. On Bosom Buddies. So that was really a cool experience. But you're right, the book goes beyond the hard work of writing and performing on stage. It teaches the technical side. I did want to share, Matt, I'm going to try this, Matt. We talked about it before. This is my new book. Is that showing?
20 questions answered by being a stand-up comedian.
This will be out in about a week, 2 weeks, and it'll be available on Amazon. And if anybody's interested, it's a shorter version of the book that you read, Matt. And but it shares the same ethics about the industry, the technical side all the way through to what do you need to do to succeed.
And just a note, send me that image too, so we can put that up in the podcast. I'll make sure that we put that up for a while so everybody can get that. And of course, all these details Scott's going over, we'll put those in the details in our podcast and the YouTube video too, so everybody can check all that stuff out easily.
That's great. Well, thanks, guys. I really enjoy spending time with you guys, and I think that your podcast and your listeners are a real value to the industry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. One last time, you want to plug away?
Well, the easiest is to say I've got a new website, scottscomedystuff.com. So it's got the membership site to see the comedy videos. It's got the books. It's got some great pictures from back in the day. And the online comedy course, if you're serious about being a stand-up comic, for $295, you get a free copy of the book. You get free access to some videos of people when they were getting started, including Paula Poundstone and Bob Saget. But you also get some true lessons and advice from other professional comics and myself as a producer. So all these things are available through scottscomedystuff.com. And my podcast, I'm sorry to double dip, stand-up comedy, your host and MC, releases a new show each week. And I know this is coming out. So just last Sunday, great interview. You guys should check it out. Milt Abel, terrific, really funny guy. I did a great interview with him. He's hilarious. Milt Abel, one of the best on the West Coast. If you get a chance, check out my podcast, Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC.
Well, there you have
Thank you, guys.
Well, this is Steve G, Matt G, and the professor of comedy, Scott Edwards, with Happened in the 90s.